day of mourning in Israel and in the wider Jewish world as Hamas hand over 4 coffins, 2 of them containing the bodies of children. It's unholy. I'm Jonathan Friedland in London.
And I'm Yonit Levy in Tel Aviv. Unholy, 2 Jews on the news. Today is Thursday, February 20th, 2025. 503 days since October 7th, 2023. And we've had no shortage of heartbreaking days since. But I think today has been one of the most painful days. Shiri Bibas was 32 when kidnapped. Her sons, Ariel, he was 4 years old. Kfir was 9 months old. And Oded Lifshitz, also from Kibbutz Nir Oz, was 84 years old. They were all kidnapped alive on October 7th, all returned in coffins today. Then Bibas, the only one from the family to return alive, only at the beginning of this month after being held by Hamas. His sister Ofri said a few weeks ago, when Kfir was supposed to be 2 years old, she said, "I'm frightened of the certainty that has been chasing us for a year, but has not yet knocked on our door." So that certainty has come knocking today. And that personal tragedy of 2 families, the Bibas family and the Lifshitz family, turned into a day of mourning today in Israel. Obviously, the kidnapping of the Bibas family encapsulating the horror of October 7th, not only the cruelty of the enemy, right, that does not have any red lines in kidnapping, young children and their mother, but also that picture that went around the world of Shiri frightened, trying to protect her 2 sons, every parent thinking of himself or herself in that situation. So it's that story of the horror of Hamas, but also of the complete and utter failure of the state of Israel to protect its citizens, and that feeling, unshakable really, that everything we thought we were melted in front of our eyes on October 7th. And we haven't been the same since. And of course, Oded Lifshitz, a man who dedicated his life to peace and to trying to reach out to the other side. His generation of men of Nir Oz also kidnapped. Most of them did not survive. The only person back of that generation of that kibbutz is Gadi Moses. And the broadcast today in the morning, there was this moment where I just needed that silence. I just kind of sat and said, this is going to be a moment of silence, because it's a day in which words escape you to try and describe the grief of a nation.
Yes, I think 250 people were taken on that day as hostages on October the 7th. And 250 is a big number. It's very hard for people to connect and to keep 250 different people in their minds. And so inevitably, in some ways very personally, different people, people develop attachments to different families, to different stories. Somehow these 2 children, partly with their very distinctive ginger hair, their sort of red hair, they became symbols and sort of totemic of the captured hostages, so young, just children. There are home videos of them, just the most adorable, sweet children. And I'm looking now at a mural that was done of the family with this very bright orange hairs. They became sort of symbolic at protests around the world, people holding up posters of different hostages. And almost every time, even if there were only 10 or 12 posters, the Bibas children would be among them. They stood for, I think, the kind of, it is the most extreme expression of innocence, young children, a baby. And then, and I don't know, you'll tell me how much Israelis have seen this image, because I know there was a decision, you and your fellow broadcasters, not to broadcast the images of the handover, not to allow Hamas again to have this theatre of cruelty that we've been talking about. But an image that has definitely been shown around the world is just of these 4 coffins on a stage in Gaza with some propaganda message above it. I mean, we know that Hamas exist at a level of moral depravity that they have plumbed the depths of moral depravity. We already knew that. But to see that they are somehow thinking that this is an opportunity, a moment for display and propaganda and theatrics, there was an armed, masked man standing alongside the 4 coffins. I looked at him and thought, do you think you're some kind of fighter? That this is some kind of military battle that you fought against a 9-month-old baby? What kind of person are you that you think this? And it was, as I say, we know this already. But today, seeing these images, reading about confirmation, as you just quoted there, of a certainty that we knew was coming, to see it again, I don't know how anybody who thinks they're somehow in solidarity or calls Hamas resistance or calls them, endows them with the heroism of fighter, can live with themselves when they look at that image.
Yeah,
I certainly couldn't conceive of such a thing.
Yeah, and you're right in saying that the Israeli networks decided this morning that they will not show the handing over of the coffins out of respect and out of the knowledge of what Hamas would try and do to these dead Israelis, and how sensitive this is for Israelis themselves. What we did, see from the sort of sidelines is that kind of not only the people coming to see this, but also the emphasis made on bringing Palestinian children to that event, which is another thing that I have a hard time understanding. But when you go back and I think anyone who saw these images, not only Israelis, not only Jews around the world, anyone seeing those images of Shiri with Ariel and Kfir on the morning of October 7th will never forget them for as long as they live. The state of Israel exists to prevent these pictures from ever happening. And that utter failure is something that you return to again and again on this day as they are brought back to Israel, not in the way that they should have been brought back. You can't not. Your heart goes out to Yarden, again, who has just been released at the beginning of this month. What he went through, we remember those images of him being beaten and the captors forcing other Israelis, Yoram Metzger and Ili Margalit, to tell him that his family was killed. But still, he had that hope coming back, that he wanted to know what happened to his family. And this is the reality today. I mean, you can't also not mention the kibbutz of Nir Oz. We talk about this a lot, that sort of black hole, the ground zero of October 7th, that 1 out of 4 of its members was either murdered or kidnapped. Some of them were kidnapped and murdered, as we discover today. The fact that most of Israeli politicians did not visit Kibbutz Nir Oz, including the prime minister himself to this day, 503 days after the war, is really something that I think should be mentioned as well. If there is any point of comfort in this day, is the fact that many Israelis, and this is a regular working day, stood up, went out of their house, stood with an Israeli flag, wanted to see this sort of convoy of cars that took the coffins from Gaza to the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Jaffa in Israel. And they wanted to, pay their respects to these 4 Israelis.
Well, I think, you and other Israelis right not to pay any attention to the sort of propaganda that they were trying to extract from this horrific day and horrific event. For what it's worth, they were trying to claim in the imagery they did that these 4 people were killed by Israeli rocket fire. Is that a hint that they themselves even know that among their people it is shaming to have killed children?
First of all, I think it is.
And they want to cast off responsibility. Is that what's going on there? I'm not buying that defense, by the way. But was that in their minds, I wonder, in the sort of attempt to propagandize this?
I think it is an attempt, first of all, to somehow regain legitimacy internally in Gaza and also outwardly towards the world. We don't know what happened to Shiri and Ariel and Kfir. We don't know what happened to Oded Lifshitz. We might know more after the autopsy. But what we do know is that there is one terror organization that is responsible for kidnapping these people from their homes, having absolutely no red lines. I mean, these are evil people, but you would think even they would stop at, kidnapping a 9-month-old baby or an 84-year-old man. But obviously, that did not stop them.
And also, let's also just state the obvious. Absent any deal or any diplomacy. They could have returned these bodies at any moment. They could have said, this is a baby. We don't need to use this as a bargaining chip. We're just going to do the right thing and hand over. There was no obstacle. There was no law that said they had to hold on to these bodies. They could have just done that. And, you know, the Red Cross and others you could point to. But why didn't they even do that? The fact that they didn't suggests they saw advantage, value in the death of these children. Anybody who thinks that they are tempted to garland this movement with the stature of heroic resistance, they should really be looking at themselves today. I was just going to say just two sort of small personal observations. One is anybody who, like me, is in the Gingy community, who was born with that kind of bright reddish hair, I don't have that shade anymore so much, but there was an immediate connection seeing these two children. And then Odette Lifshitz, I've mentioned a couple of times before that I have met a few times here in London, his daughter Sharon, that I've been present while prayers were said for him in synagogue and in a very direct way with his, you know, family there. As you say, we knew this was coming, but it doesn't make it much easier to bear when it does.
No, it really doesn't. His son Izhar was on the broadcast, and he said, because the military picked up the coffins in this sort of picture that I think will become iconic, these coffins now covered with the Israeli flag and the soldiers, and you see the pain and the sadness in their faces. And he said to us, he said, the military finally came to meet my dad a little bit too late, which, you know, that is the understatement of this year. We are trying to find some comfort in the fact that on Saturday, 3 Israeli hostages, by the way, also from Kibbutz Nir Oz, were returned to their family. Sagi Dekelchen, who's also an American citizen, Yair Horn, also an Argentinian civilian, also Sasha Trupanov, who also has a Russian citizenship, all of them Israelis, all of them from Kibbutz Nir Oz, young men who were also abducted. And you know how you think a few weeks back this was an impossibility, and now it actually happened. We thought this deal would never, ever come to life, and they did, and they returned alive to their families. That picture of this young man coming back, meeting his youngest daughter that was born when he was in captivity, the others reuniting with their families, with their loved ones, that can still happen. And by the way, is supposed to happen also on Saturday with 6 other living hostages coming back. We shall remind our listeners that after Saturday, there will still be 63 hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Out of them, Israel estimates that at least 24 are still alive. So there are a lot of questions and a lot of concerns among the hostages' families of that deal, whether or not it will indeed happen.
So because you're, and rightly, looking for signs of hope, there's one perhaps unexpected source of hope I take from this horrific chapter. We've noticed it before in a couple of conversations, one of which actually was yours with Aviva Siegel, but also with Rachel Goldberg-Polin. These remarkable people who have suffered in ways that are unimaginable, nevertheless do not allow their captors, their tormentors, to change who they are. And Rachel Goldberg-Polin famously wrote a poem about how she sees a woman like her, a Palestinian mother like her, she shares in her suffering. Aviva Siegel, in that remarkable conversation with you, said the same thing, that as she was being taken back out of captivity, she looked around and saw the devastation in Gaza and felt for those people. Sharon Lifshitz,
she said, no one's going to take my empathy away from me.
Yes, I'm not going to change. You're not going to change who I am. And Sharon Lifshitz has become somebody who a lot of the media in this country have turned to, often partly for this reason. And look, we know about those kibbutzim, that they were really the backbone of what used to be the peace movement. They, as individuals, worked extensively with Palestinians. Yocheved Lifshitz, now we must describe as the widow of Oded Lifshitz, said he tried to help Palestinians his whole life and they betrayed him, and that's true. And yet, meanwhile, Sharon Lifshitz has also said that she spoke to her mother within a week of her mother coming back. Remember, her mother was released after 17 days very early on in 2023. And she said, says Sharon Lifshitz, we made peace with the Germans, Sharon. We will make peace with the Palestinians too. Somehow, the fact that these people can hold on to that hope, even when it seems so bleak, it gives me some kind of hope and encouragement too.
Yeah, but you cannot, think of, again, this generation, the people who founded this country, who founded this kibbutz, people like Avraham Mundell and Amiram Cooper and Yoram Metzger, Chaim Perry, Alex Danzig, and of course, Oded Lifshitz. And they all were killed in captivity. They were kidnapped alive. They should have been living their lives surrounded by their children and their grandchildren and enjoying life. And instead, they died in the most horrendous circumstances. I mean, you can't not, your heart breaks when you think of this. And of course, your heart breaks when you think of the Bibas family. As you said, we've all seen the images, not only of Shiri on that day, and her family keeps saying, by the way, we should remind our listeners, her parents were also murdered on October 7th. These 3 generations of a terrible catastrophe. And her family are saying, we wish you could remember her, smiling. And we see those wedding pictures of her and Yarden. You see the unforgettable pictures of, Yarden kissing his baby boy, kissing Kfir, and Kfir laughing. Like, all of that, the family that was shattered. And it is above all a personal, terrible tragedy, but it is because of how, Israelis have sort of taken this family into their hearts, not only Israelis, but particularly us. It is really a heartbreaking day. But I think this was our attempt to somehow remind our listeners also that there are hostages coming back alive on Saturday, and this big question hovering over whether or not Netanyahu will continue this deal, although there is a lot of pressure in his own government and outside his government. First of all, officially, the prime minister deciding that his closest advisor, Minister Ron Dermel, will be the one heading the negotiations, thus moving aside head of Shin Bet Ronen Bar in particular, which Netanyahu has targeted, and of course also moving aside in a way head of Mossad Dadi Barnea, and sources close to the prime minister saying that the way the negotiations were run thus far were giving up too much to the other side. Now, I would read 2 things into that, and I don't want to complicate our listeners, but in fact, slightly contradictory. One would say Netanyahu is trying to prepare the public to say this deal is not going to continue, although there's a lot of pressure from the Trump administration, or particularly from Steve Witkoff. But the other reading of this would be he is trying to prepare his own coalition to say, oh, I'm sorry, they brought a bad deal, but I'm going to have to run its course because I have no choice. So again, there's this big question whether or not the deal will continue. We asked in a Channel 12 poll this week, we asked Israelis, would you agree to this deal continuing if that means that Hamas, this was a specific question, if that means the Hamas will stay in power and the Israeli army would withdraw from Gaza? It's a pretty clear question. The answer was 61% said they support running the deal throughout all of its stages. 26% oppose it.
Yeah, I mean, the politics of this have been always extraordinary, that the Prime Minister has been acting as if this was somehow a divisive issue, as if the country did not have a settled will that it wants these people back. And instead, the delay, the maneuverings, the games that have been played going back months and months and months. Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister, telling you in your interview with him on Channel 12 that this was ripe and ready long ago. And in fact, echoing there the sentiment that I think we did hear from the father of Hirsch Goldberg-Polin, who, when he spoke with us, and indeed, I think maybe this is the moment to, albeit indirectly, hear his voice, because he's been in touch with us. He's, I think, a listener to the Unholy podcast, and he said something very significant to you, I think.
Yes, and this is the note that he left us after our last conversation last week, exactly in that juxtaposition that has been created in Israeli society, which is either end the war and crush Hamas or bring back the hostages. And he speaks about this. This is what he said to us. How have we as a society allowed a public debate on save hostages versus destroy Hamas? It was obvious by October 8th that we can no longer allow Hamas to rule on our border. But how have we accepted a narrative that there is some historical window of opportunity in which it must happen right now at the expense of our innocent hostages? This is what John Polin writes to us. Why is it not obvious that we can and must must address Hamas, but in a week or a month or 6 months, only after we get all of our hostages home. I do not accept that we need global approval, which we don't have anyhow. I do not accept that we are at some level of military preparedness now that we won't be able to replicate in the future. I do not accept that we might need to sign some non-aggression pact that would preclude us from finding the smallest excuse to turn on the war machine again. And on top of all that, the solution to continued Hamas rule is ultimately a diplomatic one, not more war. But that could be debatable, so I won't go there, writes John Polin. Allowing save hostages versus destroy Hamas to ever become a legitimate debate is among the great failures of Israeli society since October 7th and necessitates serious introspection to understand and repair our collective soul. This is the father of Hirsch Goldberg Polin, who tragically was not saved in time and died at the end of August.
And
was executed by Hamas.
And confirmation that often the source of calm, good sense in this period has been the very people who you would forgive for being unable to see clearly at all, namely the bereaved, the hostage families themselves. Extraordinary statement from him. I agree with every word of that. And it's something you and I have been talking about on here. Why not do the deal, get the hostages back, and then deal with whatever consequences you have to, but first get them back home. Netanyahu has not taken that path, and that prompts the conclusion that's because he found it useful to keep this war going on for his own political reasons.
Sadly, the enemy that we are facing, Hamas, is very, very sophisticated, more sophisticated than we thought before October 7th. So they realize this too, right? That giving all of the hostages might lead to a continuation of the war, and they would seek any sort of assurances that would not happen. But I completely agree with what John is saying, which is this sort of equation created, or relation or juxtaposition, saying it's either this or that, has sort of sucked Israeli society into an argument that at the end of the day is not helping us bring back the hostages alive.
Meanwhile, there is the rest of the world to consider. Politics and international relations
What do you
does
mean
not.
the rest of the world?
Yeah, I know Israelis find that hard to get their heads around. Huge, epochal shift in the last week. Look, we won't get into all of it here because it's probably a conversation we'll get into in the coming weeks and months. But this massive 180-degree turn from US President Donald Trump, for decades a cardinal principle of US foreign policy, particularly Republican US foreign policy, has been antagonism or skepticism towards Russia. Instead, this week we see Donald Trump pivot wholly, it seems to me, to Russia, echoing Vladimir Putin's talking points on the war in Ukraine to the extent of suggesting that it was Ukraine that started the war, then calling Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator, and essentially saying this war's got to end. And if you add in the remarks of his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, and others, essentially on Russia's terms, no NATO membership for Ukraine and no, clawing back of the territory that was snatched and seized from Ukraine. As if to add insult to that injury, peace talks, so-called, I mean, what an abuse of that term, surrender talks more like, but talks in Riyadh between US negotiators and Russian negotiators, absent the Ukrainians themselves, whose country's future is to be determined, and the European allies, who have been foursquare in standing with the US in defending Ukraine. It looks a lot like a massive tearing up of the post-1945 world order, in which invasion is rewarded, in which the victim is the one to be punished, and rolling over, essentially, to Vladimir Putin, giving him everything he wants, even to the point of echoing his propaganda talking points. It's dizzying. Leaders, policymakers here in Europe are, I think, bamboozled by it and were freaked out, frankly, by J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference last week, where Vance dared to berate them all, suggesting that, you've got a tenuous hold on democracy because of a few wokeisms, speaking on behalf of a president who refused to accept an election defeat in 2020. And as they turn a blind eye to Vladimir Putin, who wouldn't know a democratic election if it slapped him in the face. I mean, when we won't get too early to our Chuzpah award, but outrageous brass neck. And as I say, freaking out, I mean, really shaking and shocking European leaders here who feel that the ground beneath their feet, the ground they've stood on for decades, is moving in a very alarming direction for them.
Yeah, it feels like the world is turning upside down. I think for Israelis, this was very apparent in the way, how quickly they turned, in a year and a half from victims to somehow the bad guy in the story. And just, not that I'm comparing it all, but that feeling of an American president standing, and ticking the boxes on Russia's talking points is just a very, very strange, eerie feeling. And we want to talk about, so you opened the door on discussing European politics. The biggest country in Europe is about to have elections. By the way, we're talking about Germany and 125,000 Jews in that country. We want to discuss what is happening with that, and particularly, of course, the rise of the far right.
Meron Mendel is a writer and social scientist and director of the Anne Frank Education Center in Frankfurt, Germany. He was born in Israel, but is now something of an expert on the places where Jews in Israel and Germany all meet. Meron, it's fair to say that the polls are predicting a breakthrough for the AfD in Germany this weekend, perhaps being the second largest party. I'm just curious on a personal level, before we get into more analytical thoughts, just how apprehensive, how fearful you yourself are of that outcome.
I'm very worried about the general trend, not just in Germany, but globally. We have already right populists in the States, in some European countries, and Germany is just part of this trend, which is, as I said before, very good reason to be concerned of.
Yeah, part of that trend, as you say, but also echoing a German past. And I wonder specifically if you can tell us how apprehensive the Jewish community in Germany is.
So the Jewish community is in Germany is very heterogeneous. If to be very frank with you, we have also part of the Jews here that's for me not really justified reason are part of this AfD. There is a group of Jews in the AfD. Their explanation is that the biggest threat for Jews in Germany are not the right extremists, but the Muslims. And the AfD, with its anti-Muslim ideology, seems attractive for this kind of Jews. Nevertheless, most of the Jewish community in Germany are opposing very much the AfD, and without doing some vulgar comparisons, because Alice Weidel, the head of the AfD, it's not Adolf Hitler, but still, of course, in Germany specifically, it's a good reason to be worried about, for Jews especially.
Because you rightly say this is a global trend, and yet Germany is the one that people watch for all the obvious reasons. And I'm just, sure that if these results go as they are expected to go, international media around the world will be digging out old archive pictures of probably 1932 when, the Nazi party was surging and so on. I just want your sense of how inaccurate or accurate that sort of echo is. I mean, there are roots for the AfD in some neo-Nazi parties. There have been stories about or maybe not that neo-Nazis being inside the ranks of the AfD, and some people who have minimized the Holocaust. So I know it's quite a familiar road to go down, but just sort of separate, in a way, the fear from the facts, if you would, on that link between the AfD and some of that past.
So originally, the AfD is not a neo-Nazi party. It's a Europe skeptic party. Bernd Lucke, the guy that invented this party, is economy professor from Hamburg, and their main issue was to get out of the European Union, to get out of the euro currency, back to the German mark. That's what many years their issue, and with this issue they got like 3, 4, 5% of the population in the polls. Then there was from inside in the AfD the takeover of calling it folkish, classical neo-Nazi actors. The main figure in this line is Björn Höcke, is the head of the AfD in the state of Thuringia. And he is a classical neo-Nazi. He uses term of the Nazi party. He's talking about race. He knows by the way, he's also a history teacher, so he knows very well what he's talking about. And we can talk about this internal conflict in the AfD between the Europe skeptiker, which you can compare it with Farage in the UK, and the classical neo-Nazis. But I'm afraid that the second one are the largest and the strongest part in the party.
So talk to us a little bit more about that sort of internal rift. And also, we see the example, we haven't mentioned her yet, but of Marine Le Pen in France, kind of trying to clear that very clear anti-Semitic past, her father, and the sort of Holocaust denial. Is there an attempt to sort of, probably more cosmetics than anything else, kind of clean up the party?
So in the first line, the AfD would claim for itself, we are not anti-Semitic. We are the most pro-Israel, most Zionist party in the German parliament. It's a half true and half false. It's true in the way that they are certainly supporting Israel regarding fighting Arabs. They are against Muslims, and on this point they are on the same page as the right-wing parties in Israel. Behind this part of the ideology, there is the other aspect, and which is basically their notion that being German is just there's just one possibility to be German, which means to be Christian, to be white. I would almost say heterosexual, but Alice Weidel is not heterosexual. She usually says she's not queer also, but lesbian, and she's living also with in Switzerland with her partner. She's from Sri Lanka. So there is also many you'd say contradictions in this person of Alice Weidel, but still among the majority of this party, the vision of being back to the old good Germany of Christian and white is the model what they want to achieve.
I mean, you mentioned Alice Weidel being in a same-sex relationship with a woman from Sri Lanka. Elon Musk made great play of that when he was challenged about his support for the AfD. He's addressed a rally. He made a point of meeting her. He said, "Well, it doesn't sound much like Hitler to me. A woman a lesbian in a relationship with a Sri Lankan." I want to ask you about Elon Musk and what impact he's had. I mean, he addressed one very big rally on a giant screen. It was a very striking image. It's unusual for a figure from outside to be a player in a European election campaign in quite this way. I'm interested in what impact it's had on their campaign, whether that's a popular message among Germans or whether it turns off some Germans. What can you tell us about Elon Musk in this campaign?
First of all, it's very fascinating to see the reaction inside the AfD, because of course the majority behind Alice Weidel were very happy about this support, but the neo-Nazi part were not very amused about it, because for them it's Elon Musk is one of the bad guys. It's United States, it's the globalist, and so on and so forth. So not all the AfD were happy about this intervention, but still what we see that it was kind of rehabilitation of the AfD in part of the German population. We saw that young people were more open for the messages of the party, and I would say it's not quite coincidence that few weeks later, there also the head of the Conservative Party, for the first time since 1949, when West Germany was founded, made a cooperation with the AfD and tried to legislate a law about migration with the open support of the AfD. It's the first time, and this kind of it's breaking a long-lasting taboo in German politics.
Can we talk about the reasons, because we're talking this as part of a wave that we're seeing around the world. Can we talk about the reasons for the rise of the AfD in Germany? Perhaps a lot of it has to do with what we see elsewhere, with economy, maybe even the fact that we're getting farther away from the Second World War. That has its effects. Things that were once, as you mentioned, taboo are now more acceptable. Talk to us a little bit about the sort of reasons behind this.
So as you mentioned, there are the global and there are the local factors. One very major local factor, it's the reunion of Germany since 1989. On the surface, if you just travel through the land, you will not see it immediately, the difference between West and East Germany. But for the people themselves in East Germany, there's a lot of frustration. 30 years after the reunion, they are feeling, those who left behind, those who are still in East Germany, feeling that the state abandoned them. And frankly, they also, polls are showing that the sense of democracy among these people, the beliefs in democracy, is not as much deep as in the West Germany. That has to do with many years of dictatorship. We see it also in other East European states like Hungary. So just last year we had two local elections in the states of Thuringia and Sachsen, both of them in East Germany. And in both countries, the AfD took the first place. In Thuringia, it's even astonishing because the head of the party there is Björn Höcke, as I said before, openly neo-Nazi, and he got the most voters. So that's one very major reason. And if the elections are not in, it will just be in East Germany, probably I'm not sure about it, but probably the AfD will take the first place. And then we have in Germany, as in many European countries, but Germany it's even harder, is the consequences of the war in Ukraine. Since February 2022, the German economy was very much dependent on Russian gas. That was the policy of Gerhard Schröder and Angela Merkel. There was the pipelines, Nord Stream 1 and almost Nord Stream 2. And the end of the era, the cooperation with Russia, it's a really, really blow for the bad blow for the German economy. We see that the German car industry are in deep problems. The recession, it's almost 2 years now, and this worries of many Germans after many decades of wealth and to get dragged to poverty or to insecure, make many people to believe that the AfD are the right solution.
I want to pick up two things that you've mentioned. The first one, because you mentioned this man who is, in your terms, as you put it, an explicit neo-Nazi. And I'm interested to know whether an explicit neo-Nazi means his rhetoric is not just directed at Muslims, but if he actually goes old school and talks about Jews in Germany. So tell us about that. And then the other thing is the extent to which this element of the past is actually part of AfD's appeal. And here is what I'm thinking again, actually, of Elon Musk, that the comment he made in that rally was he said there had been too much focus on past guilt. In other words, he was saying a vote for AfD is a vote to lighten your conscience. You don't have to be burdened by this anymore. And I'm just interested to know if that has a lot of appeal, perhaps particularly with younger Germans, to just shake off that burden after 80 years. So it's two questions there. I'm interested to hear what you say.
So first of all, to be honest, the wish to get rid of the past was always part of the German discussion. The first one, of course, we had already enough with this past. We had to leave it behind us. Were documented in 1945. Wow. So it's a continuity through the years. But yes, that's this voice are coming from the party, which be the second largest party. It's make it very attractive. And Björn Höcke was the one that openly called for, as he said, 108 degrees turnaround in the German way to look at the history. So what it means, 180 degrees, will mean that it's not something to be ashamed of, it's something to be proud of. And he were very openly against the Holocaust remembrance place in the city of Berlin. He called it Mahnmal der Schande. It translated the statue of disgrace. And it means not disgrace for the German people, but the disgrace that we are doing this kind of commemoration. If it's attractive for young people, I would say certainly a big part of the German society feeling attracted to this ideology. Of course, it's something that is rehabilitating themselves. Not have to apologize. This is something that certainly resonate with part of the population.
We have seen different cases over the past couple of years of this kind of win-win situation between far-right parties and the far-right Israeli government. On the one hand, the far-right parties could wash their hands and say, look, we are not anti-Semitic. Of course, we have the support of the Israeli government and we support them. And the Israeli government say, look, we have support all over Europe. These are the countries that support us. Is this the same, or is it more complicated because of that strain of the AfD that has this very clear neo-Nazi part in it?
So I would say from the side of the AfD is certainly the case. But there is also for the Israeli side some connections. We've seen in the past few years a delegation of the AfD were accepted from settlers in West Bank and from the far right parties in Israel. I remember like around 10 years ago, there was a meeting in parliament of the federal AfD party, and the special guest was Rafi Eitan. Rafi Eitan, meanwhile, is already dead, but he was one of the leading figures in the intelligence community in Israel. He was also hawkish to the Palestinians. And he came to the AfD party, and his message was, it should be not just alternative to Germany. You should be alternative to Europe. And that was a moment that you can see that first of all the hopes that right hawkish and far right Israelis have from this party, and the other hand, what it was also very helpful for the AfD, because having an Israeli Zionist guest in their as their special guest in their party, it's the I would say the joker to say no, we can't be anti-Semitic because look at us, they are supporting us. And that's, by the way, also the reason why they have this group of Jews in the AfD.
Meron, you're far from the only Israeli in Germany. There's a community there. What do you hear from them? What are they saying about this election? Just what role they might play, even in Jewish life in Germany?
Since the October 7th, 2023, we had also in Germany many cases that Jews were attacked. We had the anti-Semitic, anti-Israelis demonstration on streets of the big city. The biggest were in Berlin, where there are a minority of 200,000 Palestinians. I think there's the biggest Palestinian minority outside of Palestine in Israel. And they are not sure if the German population, the new German government will support the Jewish community as strong as the last ones. And there is the minority in the Jewish community, which is very pleased of the rise of the far right, because they are themselves believing that's the right way to deal with migration. That's the right way to deal with Muslims, and they are not believe that that's the far right are now concentrating on Jews. They think they forgot the history, and they are now focusing on Muslim migrants.
It's a complicated picture, and we will be following the results. But thank you so much for helping us understand it better, Meron Mendel. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
I thought that was a really interesting conversation, not only as Meron analyzed the sort of far right's rise as a part of a trend of a wave around the world, but also the particularities of the German story, and having this kind of party that on the one hand is actually neo-Nazis, right? I mean, he doesn't mince words here. And on the other side of it, just says, we just want to detach ourselves from Europe and all that kind of rhetoric that we've seen in other places, including the place you're sitting at right now. I mean, this is just a frightening development. I don't know what the answer to all this is, but it is quite a frightening development.
No, it is. It's obviously chilling. The historical echoes make it chilling. One note I had was that I'm one of those people who, when I look across contemporary Europe, I've always thought of Germany as an outlier in quite a good way, very particularly in terms of reckoning with the Shoah. That Germans, it seems to me, for decades, have actually wrestled with and grappled with their responsibility, their culpability in the greatest crime of at least the 20th century, in huge contrast with, name your country. Right, I mean, next door, Austria, who says we're the first victims, and you can go to Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia and all the other countries who slightly tiptoe around their own, France, their own culpability. This was a corrective, important corrective. There is a body of people who, Meron told us, since 1945, who have been saying, enough with the guilt trip, we've gone on about it too long, no more apologizing.
1945, right? I mean, how long?
1945, he said. And that is a body of opinion. And so it's easy for somebody like me to sort of listen to those liberal, enlightened voices who are, as I said, wrestling with the legacy of the Shoah. There is a body of German opinion who are not in that place. A lot of them will be voting for the AfD on Sunday. And our thanks to Meron Mendel for clarifying that important part of the picture.
So this is a somber episode of Unholy, but we still have traditions to uphold in our conversations.
We do, and we do like handing out awards.
It makes us feel better.
It makes us feel a little bit better. I mean, I don't mind if the listeners are going to at some point run out of patience with me for handing the Chuzpah Award to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue repeatedly. But this week, I thought, really, people will forgive me this one, I think. Donald Trump on social media announcing that he is going to block a congestion charge, anti-traffic measure in New York City, using his power as president to intervene in the affairs of a big city. And he posted this thing and ended it saying, "Long live the king." And people thought, what? Long live the king. And just in case there was anyone who didn't understand that, the White House itself, on its official social media account, posted a sort of mock-up Time magazine style image of Donald Trump with a crown on his head. Now, I'm not a number one global scholar on American history, but I have a sneaky feeling that the whole point of setting up this country was a kind of no king's rule. That was the point. It's a republic.
I mean,
and
if not, they'd still be paying taxes to you guys. So I think that was the point.
I know, and his life has gone backwards ever since. Of course, we lost the Americas. But no, I think it's an amazing thing to have done, and tells you a lot. You know, he said as a joke, said it was a joke. Dictator on day one. King is probably a word that sits with him a little bit better. He's always talking about running for a third term. This tells you his mindset. It's not just a joke, and the people around him put a reward to whoever runs the White House social media account for putting a crown on the head of an American president, a violation really of everything America was founded to represent.
Okay, the award commission would allow this week. It's been a month since the inauguration of Donald J. Trump, but next week you're coming up with a new chutzpah. That's it. We'll allow for it this week. I made a note, from the a little asterisk on your report card this week.
Okay.
The Mensch Award this week. You know what? We thought about giving it to two Israeli artists, Omer Adam and Ivri Lider, both of them, canceling their performances right before today, knowing or realizing that it will be a day of mourning and kind of setting the tone for Israelis. But if I can also give an award to something that is detached from the Israeli story. I was almost going to say detached from the Jewish story, but that's not exactly true. We're not going to go too much into the 50th anniversary of Saturday Night Live. We might do that in our next couple of episodes. I'm not sure this is the episode to do that, but I would want to give the award to Lorraine Newman and Jane Curtin of the first original staff of Saturday Night Live, holding up the picture of the legendary Gilda Radner, their friend, who has tragically died a long time ago, and having her in that way participate in the festivities of the 50th anniversary. I just thought that was a beautiful moment of friendship that we should kind of point out. Again, we will probably talk about this legendary television show, and it's I think the inspiration it gave to the wonderful Israeli satire program Eretz Nehederet, but we'll probably do that on a different episode.
Yeah, we'll aim to do that another time, but that's a good little bit of cheer. As you can see, we are looking for cheer and a ray of light wherever we can find it on a week like this. Remember, we are on Facebook and Instagram, and do join the friends and family of Unholy. I think this very weekend on Sunday we're going to be doing our very first Zoom call for family members. I think it will be a family session, really. We've got a lot to talk about on Sunday. I think that's at 2 p.m. UK time, 4 p.m. Israel time, and 9 o'clock in the morning if you are in the United States. If you are a family member, part of the Unholy family, you will have access, live to that Zoom call, where you and I will be fielding questions and in conversation with all our listeners. And I think we might be bringing it to friends of the podcast as a bonus episode sometime next week. I think we've got lots of thank yous.
So on Sunday, the 23rd, we should say for some of it's a weekend, for some it's a working day, but indeed it will be Sunday, the 23rd, and we will say our thank yous to Michal Porat, and we will meet very soon.